Ah, nostalgia. It makes the world go round, doesn't it? There's nothing better than revisiting a show from your childhood, but what if something happened that prevented you from doing that? In this video, I'm going through 5 different shows you probably grew up with, if you're around my age at least, that have lost pilot episodes. Some of these are going to be pilots for the show themselves, some of them will be for spin-offs that ultimately never got made, some of these are pilots for earlier versions of shows you know and love, but you won't be able to see them anytime soon. Unless they all get released the day after this video goes up. I'm willing to bet these pilots will shock you for either being so different from the show they ended up as, or by their very existence. So let's get started. Let's start from the bottom up, so to speak, with a couple of shows for preschoolers. First is The Backyardigans. The Backyardigans was awesome. Those characters were so cool, the Pupa Polka still slaps, and it was a big hit. But something you may not know is that it took a long time for it to finally get made. The pilot episode for The Backyardigans was produced in 2002 and led to the show being picked up, eventually airing its first episode in 2004. Now this unaired pilot is interesting in that it has some crude animation and doesn't feature Austin, but while that is a lost pilot, that's not the one I'm talking about today. I'm talking about Me and My Friends. Me and My Friends was a pilot made in 1998 that never got picked up. It featured the Backyardigans minus Austin in live action with people in suits on a set at Nickelodeon Studios. This version of the show was never picked up, and it wasn't until a few years later that the concept was retooled for animation. Only a brief clip and some behind-the-scenes photos exist of the Me and My Friends pilot, but it's enough that I would pay good money to see the full thing. Just the idea of seeing a secret origin for those characters as live-action ones like Teletubbies or Elliot Moose is so bizarre to me, having only been exposed to the actual show, and I think it would be trippy but cool to watch it. Leading off of that and on to one more Nick Jr. show, it's time to talk about Blue's Clues. Blue's Clues was another popular Nick Jr. show and another one that was a staple of my childhood. But there exists somewhere in the ether an unaired pilot episode. From the short clips and pictures of this pilot, it kind of registers as an uncanny valley. For those uninitiated, the uncanny valley effect is when something comes across as disturbing or creepy because it looks like something you're familiar with, but is just a little off. Like for example, clowns creep some people out because they're human-like, but they have big shoes, white skin, and act weird, which makes them very off-putting just being a slight twist of something you recognize. This was kind of the case with the Blue's Clues pilot, which was called Blueprints, which honestly is a much more clever name than Blue's Clues. In this version, everything's very similar to the actual show, but not quite the same. Steve is just wearing some red polo instead of his iconic green shirt. The background plates look similar, but just a little different, and apparently Mr. Salt may have had a Brooklyn accent instead of a French accent, and presumably so would Mrs. Pepper if she was in this pilot. One misconception about this pilot is that in it, Blue was actually an orange cat named Mr. Orange. Mr. Orange was created early in development, replaced with a blue cat named Mr. Blue, and eventually became the Blue we know and love long before this pilot was made. I mean, think about it. The name Blueprints doesn't make any sense if the name of the main character is Mr. Orange and not Blue. But nonetheless, this would have been very interesting to see. Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide was a great show, underrated at the time that it aired. Created by Scott Fellows, it showed Ned and his best friends Mose and Cookie trying to make their way through middle school, giving helpful tips along the way. But there are multiple lost pilots surrounding this show. The first was the original pilot for the series that aired in 2003 on Nickelodeon. Interestingly, the show at this point was called Ned's Classified School Survival Guide, and Cookie, played by Daniel Curtis Lee, wasn't a part of the show. Instead, a similar character named Boogie was in his place, played by Stephen Markarian, who would later play the recurring character Albert Wormenheimer in the show proper. Following this, another pilot episode was made called Ned's Locker, and little is known about it, though if I had to guess, it's probably similar to Locker's Season 1, Episode 1B. Both of these pilots are lost. Power Rangers is a show I talk about a lot on this channel, and what I'm about to talk about I'll probably make a video on at some point. But similarly to how Backyardigans had a pilot with a similar concept years before the show would get picked up, the same would be true for Power Rangers. Power Rangers is an adaptation of the Super Sentai franchise in Japan, using the action footage from the show and intersplicing it with original American footage with American actors. The show debuted in 1993 with Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, an adaptation of Kyoryu Sentai Judenja, the 16th season of Super Sentai. But the story of Power Rangers actually starts in 1986, when Haim Saban, co-founder of Saban Entertainment, the company behind Power Rangers, was on a business trip to Japan and was flipping through channels when he suddenly happened upon a show called Chudenshi Bioman, the 8th season of Super Sentai. He fell in love with the show and wanted to bring it to America with the method I described earlier of mixing the expensive to produce Japanese action footage with much cheaper to produce American footage. He produced a pilot episode, appropriately called Bioman, in 1986, but it was never picked up. It wasn't until 1992 when he showed the pilot to Margaret Loesch at Fox that it was picked up, and of course at that point the footage was outdated and the actors were too old, so they started fresh with the concept. There's not much footage of this pilot that's been released publicly. In the released unaired pilot episode of Power Rangers, there's a short English dubbed clip from Chudenshi Bioman that's assumed to be from the Bioman pilot. And a few years ago, some footage was released as a special feature on a Power Rangers DVD release. This footage was a part of a pitch promo made in 1992 to pitch Power Rangers as a concept to Fox. This promo, called Galaxy Rangers, interspliced some of the American footage from the Bioman pilot with footage from Kyoryu Sentai Judenja. The pilot still likely exists somewhere in the Saban vault, but it probably won't surface in full anytime soon due to rights issues with the Bioman footage. Last but not least, let's talk about The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, or at the very least a planned but scrapped spin-off of it. In 2007, as Sweet Life was coming to an end after 3 seasons, Disney started looking at their options for spin-offs. 2 pilots were made for spin-offs. One of these was the pilot for Sweet Life on Deck, and the other was a pilot for a show starring everyone's favorite character from the show, Arwen! That's right, a pilot was made for an Arwen TV show. It would have featured Arwen moving in with his sister and helping raise his nieces. One of the major stars of the show was Selena Gomez as one of Arwen's nieces, cast before Wizards of Waverly Place. The show didn't get picked up for a few reasons. One was that the network thought that Sweet Life on Deck would be better liked by kids. Another one was that it was hindered by the 2007 writer's strike. Some even say that maybe instead of Selena Gomez getting hired on Wizards after Arwen was cancelled, the show was cancelled because Disney wanted her for Wizards. Only 2 clips of the pilot can be found online, but I would have loved to watch this as a kid. So there you go, 5 surprising lost TV pilots from your childhood. Don't forget to subscribe for daily videos on the franchises you love, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.